Thank you very much. Thank you, Glenn, for the opportunity. So my name is Cedric Hermans. I'm from Brussels, Belgium, and I'm here in my position of editor-in-chief of the Hemophilia journal. So clearly the objective of today is to provide some guidance to scientists, clinicians, researchers, and health professionals who are actively involved in multidisciplinary hemophilia care and who want to publish their observation day reports in the Hemophilia journal, but this is also applicable to other journals. So I think when you look at what's happening today, well, clearly there is a better access. Well, I will have a first introductory slides to explain, the setting. There is a better access to hemophilia treatments globally. Care is currently changing the life of many patients with hemophilia and other inherited bleeding disease in numerous developing countries, but also developed countries. And these changes are really encouraging, and they're also stimulating a lot of research locally. So many research initiatives have been recently launched, such as projects, and many of them deserve to be communicated through scientific publications. So a few words about the Hemophilia Journal for those of you who are less familiar with the journal. So the Hemophilia Journal is a multidisciplinary global journal focused on inherited bleeding disease. The Hemophilia Journal is the official journal of the World Federation of Hemophilia, but not only the WFH, it's also endorsed by the EHAD, the European Hemophilia and Allied Disorder Association, and also another organization based in North America and the US, which is the Hemostasis and Thrombosis Research Society of North America, which also focus on inherited bleeding diseases. So if I need to emphasize some of the current strengths of the Hemophilia Journal, so it covers all dimensions and aspects of hemophilia and other inherited bleeding disease. So it's really an holistic journal. So it could be difficult to publish, nursing paper or physio papers in other journals, but they are certainly welcome in hemophilia journals. It's a multidisciplinary journal. It also has the potential to address hemophilia care globally. As I already said, it's the official journal of several organizations, and I'm convinced that the journal has a significant impact on hemophilia care. And for those of you who were sitting in this room this morning, we discussed a lot about the guidelines that have been published in the journal several times. As I already said, access to hemophilia treatment and care is improving globally. What's good news is that clearly there is an increased awareness of the disease at all levels. There is also an increasing in the health infrastructure that are in place with more and more comprehensive care centers in many developing countries, and this is excellent news. And there are multiple ongoing educational initiatives globally, outreach program, and as you all know, factor concentrate, non-replacement therapies donations through material aid program are increasing. So that provides us with plenty of opportunities to study, but also report what's going on at the global level. And there is clearly a changing landscape of care globally with more and more prophylaxis in many countries. But as you realized this morning, we need to collect data. Increasingly, data are important. But data should not only be collected, but they should be validated and published. It's clear that participation into international registries and clinical trials is very important, not only in developed, but also in developing countries, very important. Invasive procedures are performed in an increasing number of countries and sometimes very complex of them. Recently, I think yesterday I received a review about shoulder arthroplasty in patients with hemophilia. Quite uncommon, but that was an extensive review, quite interesting. And gene therapy, as you all know. So clearly, scientific publications are important, but as you know, there is a huge gap between developed and developing countries. Clearly, there is a lot of disparity in terms of scientific developments between developed and developing countries. And also many papers in the field of hemophilia and other bleeding disease. In fact, they come from well-developed countries. Although we know that a lot of research is going on in less developed countries. So I think we have many gaps to fill in hemophilia and inherited bleeding disorders, and this is one of the gap we need to fill up in the future. And I would like to emphasize that recently in the journal, we've seen a growing contribution from developing countries, and this is quite interesting. If you look at recent publication, and these publications, they deal with many aspects, modalities and benefits of prophylaxis, more specifically low-dose prophylaxis with replacement, but also non-replacement therapy. Interesting data that are important about the demographics of hemophilia in different parts of the world, comorbidities and what's their impact in patients with hemophilia in different parts of the world, quality of life that has to be assessed differently depending on the place where you live, and also the management of specific complications such as pseudotumor. Here in Europe, pseudotumors are now quite unusual, but they remain an important problem in other parts of the world, and experience has to be collected and reported. So I would like to share with you some recent illustration of publication from developed countries or less developed countries that were published in the journals. They are listed here. They come from, all the planet, and some of them are quite interesting. Myself and my team, we were involved in a training program with the Ivory Coast, and my colleague, in fact, she performed her PhD there. And I need to tell you that during that training program, I think we generated 7 or 8 papers. Not all of them were published in hemophilia, but most of them were published in hemophilia. So this kind of research can certainly be published in the journal. So it's clear that many less developed countries nowadays very actively contribute to therapeutic developments, also by enrolling numerous patients into clinical trials. And I think the best example of this is gene therapy. If you look at some very important gene therapy trials conducted over the last 5 years, many patients were recruited in South America, in Africa, in Asia, and it's nice that all this contribution is acknowledged in the papers. So what I would like to do with you is to, and this is a quick outline of my lecture, how do we assess papers from an editor perspective? And I would like to summarize with you what's the background on this complex process of publication, and also how should you manage the peer review comments. So my task as an editor-in-chief, I try to brainstorm a little bit and summarize this on the slide. So my task of editor-in-chief and the other co-editors is to identify high-quality, relevant, scientifically valid original submission. And I think this is a very important responsibility. I don't know if you know that, but last year nearly 10,000 papers had to be retracted. That never happened with the journal, and this is a scenario that I want to avoid. We want to make sure that what we publish in the journal is of high quality. So we also need to manage a fair, honest, valid, and timely, transparent peer review process, very important. I need to interact with the reviewers, interact with the authors as much as I can when they have questions about the manuscript. We need to promote the reputation, the quality, the scientific quality, the integrity of the journal, make sure that in the journal we have balanced articles. So make sure that we address nursing topics, clinical topics, musculoskeletal genetics in a balanced way, avoid conflicts, avoid plagiarism, which is sometimes difficult to detect. I'm the editor-in-chief, but there is a lot of money at stake here. That costs money. So I need to make sure that I keep good relationship with the publisher and the entire production team. This is important. I also need to interact with other journals to make sure that there is no detrimental competition, I would say. I also like to invite submission. If I realize that one topic would deserve a good publication, so I could invite someone to submit a paper. I need to promote the visibility of the journal, and also I need to coordinate the entire editorial board. So this is a lot to do. The good news is I'm not alone doing this. So these are the different steps from a submission to a production. So that takes time. So if your intention is to have 1 more paper in 1 year or 2 more papers, you need to realize that will not happen within 3 weeks. It's a very long process. So we will receive the submission. We will validate the submission, make sure that the format is fine. That will be assigned to me or to another editor. I will evaluate the paper quickly, and then I need to assign the papers to reviewers. Sometimes it's really challenging. I'll come back to that. And then I need to follow the review process, which cannot last months. We need to make sure that we get sufficient reviewers before making a decision. I need to analyze the comments, and then I need to communicate the decision with the authors. And then you will receive the comments. You need to adapt your paper. So this is the revision process. We will receive 1, 2, 3 revision, depending on the quality of the revised work, make a final decision, and then transfer to production. So as you can see, many steps, 12 steps summarized on these slides. So what are first the criteria for publication? The first thing, and I think very important, make sure that your work is original and address a relevant and prevalent problem. So the problem is that nowadays, sometimes I receive plenty of papers telling me that prophylaxis works. Well, we know that prophylaxis works. Okay, so yes, you could do this in your own country with 15 patients and show that prophylaxis with short-acting, long-acting emicizumab or other agents work. Well, honestly, make sure that this is new information. If it's just application of existing information, it would be difficult for me to publish this in an international journal. So that should be new. I always compare this to a big wall. In a wall, you have bricks. And we need to make sure that each brick is a new piece of knowledge. So your paper should contribute to this global knowledge. It's important to achieve this. Otherwise, it's very likely that the paper will be accepted. And we should also make sure that the questions that will be addressed is relevant for the entire community. Also that the methodology is valid, that the sample size is large enough, and that all the ethical requirements are completely fulfilled. So many conditions. As I wrote on this slide, I think the first question to ask yourself is it worth trying to publish? Well, the first, and this is probably the most critical question that you need to ask yourself. So probably you have a nice observation, you have a nice population, but you need to think twice. Do you think honestly that this work will impact on the community globally? Maybe that could be nice as a local work or local report, but does it deserve to be published in an international journal such as Hemophilia? About the format of publication, well, there are different formats. I will not go into the details of each slide. I'm quite happy to share all my slides. So this could be an original study, it could be a short report, or it could be a letter. So you need to decide in advance, what would best correspond to the information you want to share in your paper. Is this really a large original study with hundreds of patients? Well, clearly it should be an original study. If it's a much smaller observation in this much smaller group, maybe it could be a short report, a letter if you want to comment on something. Case reports. Well, case reports, if you want to submit a case report to the Hemophilia Journal, it should be really, really original. I would say it should nearly be the first observation of that type. Otherwise, very likely it will not be published. Why? Because it's very unlikely that the paper will be quoted, cited in the future, so it will not contribute actively to the reputation of the journal. You could also submit reviews, commentaries, editorials. You're totally free to do that. If you want to submit a review, you can always contact the editorial office and ask me, I have an idea of review, and ask me. Usually, I never stop this kind of submission because I think that there is probably a place, and I tell colleagues, well, submit your paper and then it will be assessed and we will decide. It's quite difficult for me to reject upfront an invitation to submit a review, except I would be totally transparent with you. If I know that a review on the same topic has been submitted three weeks ago and is currently being processed, I would tell you honestly, that it's very unlikely that your paper will be selected. So there are some criteria that they should be strictly followed. Clearly, you need to take into account the length of your paper, the number of words. I think this is important. Sometimes people ask me, I have a very good paper, but honestly, it's 5,000 words and you require 4,000. Usually I tell colleagues, it should be 4,000. Try to summarize your work. I think the final message will be the same. And honestly, if I accept this kind of proposal, that means that there will be a lot of disparities and it's not good. So there are rules, and I think we need to follow this rule very carefully in terms of length and in terms of format. And what you need to do is, what you need to know is that someone at the editorial office will check whether all these requirements have been strictly followed. Very important. In terms of paper structure, well, I will quickly go through this because this is very basic and I'm sure that you are familiar with this. Well, all these papers, they follow what we call the IMRAD structure with an introduction, method, results, and discussion. So this is the classical format of the paper with the title, abstract, keywords, intro, materials, results, discussion, acknowledgement, disclosure. You need to indicate the individual contribution, the references, and increasingly we ask you a data statement, so you should tell the editors and the editorial office how the data, the original data, could be obtained from. So will they be published as a supplementary material, or so this is also what you need to provide. So the title, very important, it should catch the eyes, it should be specific, it should be short, very important. The title will attract the readers. So very important that you work on this. Sometimes it could take days to identify the right title that you feel happy, comfortable with, but the title is very important. The abstract. Abstract is very important too. That will really be some sort of game changer for a scientific paper. You need to know that the abstract is the second most read section of the paper after the title. So let's make sure that the abstract is very attractive. The abstract will be accessible on multiple platforms, on PubMed. But, if you expect a lot of people to read your paper, make sure that the abstract is well written. I think this is very important, but I'm sure that you know this. Keywords, they need to be carefully selected because this is how your paper will be identified among the millions of papers that currently exist. Very important. Introduction, well, clearly you need to work on this. It should provide a concise, up-to-date, relevant update on the topic and clearly introduce your research, your paper. So you need to make sure that someone who is not familiar with the topic of your paper will quickly, easily get enough familiarity with the topic. So it's also a very important part, and it should not duplicate the discussion. This is very important. Materials and methods, so clearly you should explain how you did it, what you did exactly. So in fact, if I had to repeat that study, there should be enough information available to repeat it strictly. So this is how you need to consider this section on materials and methods. So this is very important. So you should be in a position to be able to replicate and confirm the work, even if you were not yourself the primary investigator. It's very important. The results, well, I think they should be clearly indicated, well explained. You should focus on the facts, measurement, observation, very important to focus on this. I will not go through all the detail of the slides because this is more or less basic information. The discussions and conclusion, well, very important to discuss in detail to what extent your research question was answered. Go back to the introduction. So you set the scene and then you need to go back to that and clearly explain what you did, what's the relevance, what are the limitations. It shouldn't be too long. It should be well written. And at the end, there should be some clear, explicit, concise take-home messages. Well, usually you do not perform this kind of work yourself alone. There are probably people who help you to do that. They might be colleagues or patients or you get some funding or support or whatever. So it would be really frustrating for people who contribute to the work, who are not co-authors, not to have their names or reference in this section. So let's make sure that you do not forget to mention people who should be there, or funding, very important. And the reference, well, there are great tools nowadays to help you with the reference list. They should be used, but always check, because some of the tools that now exist could have some limitations. Sometimes they introduce errors in names and things like that. So do not rely 100% on these tools, and double check all the references at this stage. Otherwise, you will have to do it on the proof, and it takes much more time. So what are the different steps here? So from submission to production. So now I would like to share with you some information. So this does not come from the literature. This is my personal experience that I try to summarize on some slides. So immediate rejection, this is something which is quite usual with major journals. If you decide to submit a paper to the New England, to the Lancet, it's likely that your paper will be rejected, okay, upfront. So you'll get within 24 hours a comment back from the editorial office telling you, no, we cannot accept, thank you, and for thinking about us, but no, here, well, we try to avoid this, except if the topic is totally outside the scope of the journal. If after a first reading I realize that the paper is of really poor quality, if the language is very poor, if there is an unacceptable degree of plagiarism that would be detected up front, and if the format is inappropriate. Does that happen frequently? I would say that I reject less than 10% of the papers up front. I would even say less than 5%, because our intention is to give you as much change as possible to have your paper accepted. But sometimes we need to do that. And then the peer review process. This is increasingly complicated. Why? Because there are many submissions, and there are people who are good reviewers, excellent reviewers, and there are people who are not good reviewers. Well, clearly the good reviewers, I know them, but these people sometimes get a little bit overloaded. So we need to identify ideally a few reviewers, ideally 3 to 4. That's why I try to do, because I know that most of the time only half of them will respond. And then we need to, so we have good platforms to do that. So I get a paper, try to identify 4 people on the planet that have an interest in this. And then I will follow whether they agree to review the paper. If not, I need to invite others. And then I need to follow how quickly they provide their answers, their comments. And then when we receive 2 or 3 different comments, it's time to look at them, analyze them, and make a first decision. And very likely that some degree of revision will be required, and that the paper will go back with the comments to the authors. So what about the selection of the reviewers? Well, clearly, I try to select well-known or coming experts. And that could be, young people, even people doing PhD or, but we know that they know the topic in the field. Most of these people would have had previous publication in the same research area in the past. Reviewers should be totally independent from the authors. Sometimes I get papers and the authors provide me some recommendation regarding the referees, the reviewers, but clearly some of them, they work in the same hospitals or in the same city or in the same country. It's clear that I avoid that. I try to avoid people with minimal potential conflict of interest. This is important. Usually it's outside your country. So if you're asked to provide recommended reviewers, do not select people from your own country. Do not select people who have already published 10 papers with you. Clearly, there will be some sort of bias. We need to make sure that we receive high-quality, pertinent, insightful preview reviews from the reviewers. This is important, that we receive them timely, although most of us are quite busy, but we cannot take months, or it should ideally take 2, 3, 4 weeks. And you need to know that sometimes the selection of the reviewers can be quite problematic. A few weeks ago, I received a paper about antibodies against factor 13 or factor 13 deficiency. Honestly, there are very few people on this planet who are great experts in this. And recently, I received a paper about, shoulder prosthesis in patients with hemophilia. There are not many people who have done this before, so it will be quite challenging to identify reviewers. And then the reviewers, they provide their evaluation of the paper from 1 to 6, just a global rating. 1 is really bad, 6 is excellent. Usually papers are rated between 4 and 5. If they provide a rating about 2 or 3, usually it's a bit too weak. And then the reviewers will provide me with comments about the English quality, whether the paper is too long, the figures and tables, whether they are appropriate, the statistics, ethics, ratios, ethics, is it well addressed, and also whether the paper would be worth producing an editorial later. Important to know, if I have the chance to receive a very original study, maybe it would be useful for the community to have an editorial commentary on this paper. Also, the reviewers, and if you do this yourself as a reviewer, you need to tell whether you have a potential interest. And clearly, if you have a clear interest, refuse the review. That's what most people do if they have a conflict of interest that I was not aware of. Well, it's nice to know that people are honest enough to disclose this. So we will ask other people, and then they will come up with some recommendation. What they will provide to us are comments. You need to know that there are two types of comments. Comments that are provided to me confidentially, and comments that will be shared with the authors. And as I will share with you, sometimes there is some discrepancy, because the good news is that the reviewers are usually very kind with the authors, very kind. Even if the paper is not good, okay? The paper might be not good at all, but most of the reviewers are friendly. And that's nice. I think we live in a friendly community globally. Sometimes things can change, but for the moment it's more or less friendly. And sometimes, the comments that are made to the editor are not good at all. And that might be difficult for me, because the comments that are made to me, I'm not supposed to share them with the authors. So sometimes I try to capture one or two sentences of the comments made to me that are shared with the authors so that they understand. Otherwise, they could not understand why the decision has been rejection, whereas the comments were rather positive. And what are the criteria that are mainly assessed by the reviewers? First, the relevance, the importance, whether it is timely, and whether the problem is prevalent. They will also look at the study design, whether it's appropriate, comprehensive, or rigorous, whether the sample size is large enough, whether the literature review is appropriate, and whether it's up to date, and also the quality of the writing. So this information, you can also use it if you are invited as a reviewer. If you are a reviewer, make sure that you pay attention to all this. That will really help to evaluate objectively the quality of the paper. As an editor-in-chief, I also have the obligation to evaluate the quality of the reviewers. So there are good reviewers, there are average reviewers, there are bad reviewers, because as editors, we will rate them, whether the quality of their review was, how was it, okay, and whether it was timely or so. This could be quite useful in the long term, because it will help you identify the good reviewers. The problem is that there are not that many reviewers, and as I said, sometimes the good ones are overloaded. What could be the issues with the reviewing process? Well, sometimes, the reviewers that you invite, they do not provide the comments on time. And this is quite difficult to manage. And this is also a message to you. If you accept to review a paper, do this on time. Because sometimes, I have papers who have been waiting for review for 3 months because, an expert received the invitation, committed to do it, but never did it. So that's the problem. The second is that comments could be of very poor quality. Sometimes I get 3 sentences, very general. It's clear that the paper was not analyzed in depth. Sometimes, the comments or the evaluations are conflicting. I'll come back to that. The comments are sometimes really negative, really, really negative. That could happen. So for you, as an author, it could be really frustrating, or sometimes a little bit aggressive. So sometimes I need to modify a little bit the wording because it would not be appropriate. Or too positive. Sometimes it's too positive. And as I said, sometimes there are intrinsic discrepancies between what is written and communicated to the editor and to the authors. What will be the final decision? Final decision could be acceptance. If you get a paper accepted like this, without any revision, in my view, that's a little bit suspicious. Maybe predatory journals do that, but for the Hemophilia journal, it's quite unusual. Why? Your work can always be improved, always. Even minor changes, but it can always be improved. And then it could be revised with minor or major revision. Sometimes, the work is good quality, but it shouldn't be an original paper. It should be published as a letter or commentary or a shorter paper. So sometimes, you see this as it's not good news. Well, it could be a good news. Your paper will be accepted, but the format has to be changed. The paper could be rejected, And sometimes you will receive the invitation to transfer your paper to another journal. So you need to know that there is some sort of cascade process, like Hemophilia is part of Wiley. The publisher is Wiley. Wiley has many journals in the field of hematology in general. So if we feel that your paper is not appropriate for Hemophilia, it could be transferred to another journal. But that means that if I do this, I want to be fair, honest with the other editor-in-chief, make sure that it does not receive a poor quality paper. So the quality should be there, but maybe there is something there which is a bit missing, or the paper should be reoriented to another journal. And then, let's say I send a paper to 3 reviewers, and this is the different scenarios that I can have. So here you can see the paper in green. The three reviewers have a consensus. Easy for me. So this is clear that 3 independent reviewers provided the same evaluation. Sometimes, you get a lot of discrepancies. Like, someone tells you it's unacceptable, minor, or major. How do you manage this? Sometimes it's very complicated. Very, very complicated. Sometimes there is a lot of discrepancies between what the reviewers tell you. Sometimes what I do, I ask a 4th person to help me make a decision. Or what I do, sometimes I decide myself. Well, let's say there is a paper that was rated unacceptable by one of the 3 reviewers, but the 2 other ones were more or less positive. So I will give the chance of a revision, and we will see what the revision provides. But this is not always easy. The situation where all of them have a consensus is much easier to manage. What are the most common reasons for rejection? The paper is incomplete, inappropriate, insufficient statistics. The hypothesis is not valid at all. There is a lack of originality. The results are over-interpreted. There is a suboptimal, inappropriate, or insufficient description of the population. It's completely biased. It's not well written. There is no coherence in the paper, or there is a lot of plagiarism. Sometimes plagiarism is 40, 50, 50%. So clearly 50%. I will not accept this kind of paper. I would like to alert you with these major threats, which are predatory journals. Do you know what predatory journals? These are journals that they keep inviting you to submit papers all the time, okay? And these papers will rapidly go through review process, very likely that they will be accepted. But once they are accepted, please make sure that your credit card is ready to pay for publication. So they will ask you to pay for this. So this is a major threat. It's really polluting science. You need to know that in some countries now, if let's say you are a PhD student and one of your papers of your PhD was published in one of these predatory journals because they are now well identified, well, this paper will not qualify for your thesis. So be very cautious with this. We know which journals are predatory and which journals are not predatory. So, and some of them, there are even some official lists for this. So be very cautious with this. These are journals which try to drain money. You need to know that all this publication, there is a real publication business with a lot of money there. Well, for the people in the room who are engaged in the academic career, we all know that your academic career will depend on publications and so on. These people know that. So they try to make money with this. They try to attract submission. The review process is really, really poor. And I think they represent a major threat for the integrity of medical science. Another issue is plagiarism. So it's easy nowadays to copy, the methods, the material, discussion from another paper. But you need to know that we have good tools to identify this. So once you submit a paper, the paper will be digested by one of the software, which is quite good. It does tell you words by words or sentences by sentence or section by sections where they could come from. So we see this. If, let's say, we have accepted papers with similarity rate of 30-40%, but why was it like this? Because it was, again, a paper on prophylaxis, and the same authors more or less duplicate parts of an introduction in another journal. So that was not a major issue, okay? Or let's say your paper contains information that has previously been accepted as an abstract somewhere. So yes, it's plagiat, but it's own plagiat. Or let's say your thesis was published somewhere by your university and the program will identify this. Well, this is self or own plagiarism. But clearly what that kind of software shows is, let's say if you pick up a whole section of a paper and then introduce this in your paper, that will be detected easily. And we know exactly where. So it's very, very sophisticated. It's used by most publishers. It has access to a large database. It will produce a similarity index, which is highly precise. It's used by most journals in the field. And sometimes, we decide to reject a paper just on the basis of this, or that could be a major concern. But we will look at this because, as I said, the similarity could be present in different parts of the paper with a different impact. To conclude, ChatGPT. Do you use ChatGPT? Have you used ChatGPT? Well, recently there was a paper, I don't know if Mike Macris is in the room, but Mike gave echo to a paper that is available on PubMed, and clearly the author forgot to exclude from the paper a section that was written by ChatGPT. And nobody identified this. How is this possible? So clearly, if you ask us, ChatGPT, please write me a good paper about prophylaxis and why there should be that kind of recommendation for prophylaxis, well, clearly ChatGPT will do it. Okay, it will do it. And it will be nicely written and things like that. Please don't do that. Don't do that. We have tools to detect this, and I think this is not the way to go. So do not use ChatGPT for the conception and the design of the study to acquire and analyze and interpret data. Don't do that. This is important. And also, when you draft your paper, don't ask ChatGPT to produce the whole introduction. Honestly, I don't think that you will be really proud when your paper will come out. You will not gain a lot of satisfaction with this. Please don't do that. And also, you need to know that ChatGPT cannot be listed as a co-author. Okay, it's not a co-author. Some people have tried to do that. I will not accept this in the Hemophilia journal. Authors should be human beings. Okay, so let's be cautious with this. But as I said, ChatGPT could be really useful. It's an assistant, but it does not replace human beings. Very important. Do not submit manuscripts that have been generated by ChatGPT or other alternative programs. However, you could use it for editing. Okay, so who is this in this role as English as a mother language? You are all English speaker? All of them? Is this your mother language? No. Okay. So for you, well, for me too, I was born in Belgium. My mother language is French. So, writing, when you write a paper, I think you have a double effort. You need to produce your paper, and then you need to make sure that the English will be correct. Okay. And this is an obligation. So here, I think this kind of tool can be really useful. You have other tools you could use, DeepL, you could use all the tools, but make sure that these tools do not truncate or modify what you wanted to write. I think this is important because sometimes, this kind of program can completely alienate, or sometimes ChatGPT loves concise text, so it could delete 1/3 of it. Okay, and that could impact on the sense. Very important too, and increasingly important, diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are 3 important concepts, and we need to make sure that this is present in the papers, in terms of authorship, in terms of recruitment, if possible. So let's make sure that among editors and among journals, many initiatives have been launched to make sure that these very important concepts are not purely aspirational, but are part of the papers that we produce. So this is very important. Let's make sure that we make this a reality in all aspects of the paper. How can we increase the visibility of the paper? This is very, very important in 2024. You could use tools like Twitter or X, very important. What's increasingly important are plain language abstracts or summaries. So in a paper, you could have two abstracts. The abstract, which is the pure scientific abstract in a scientific language, but it would be nice to have an abstract in a plain language that could be easily understood by non-scientific people. And honestly, it's quite challenging to write this kind of abstracts. It could take hours, if not days, to produce this kind of material because it should reflect the content of the paper. And I think it would be nice to submit it with the paper so that it would be peer-reviewed too, with the same quality. But it's very difficult to do that. But it's very important, I think, and increasingly important, especially when we work on papers that could have direct implication for the patient's community. You know, if you, let's say, you identify a new mutation or genetic variant or whatever, I don't think you need this kind of plain language abstract. But if you identify something which is very important for the community, let's make sure that the content of your paper will be summarized in this kind of abstract, visual abstract. So are you good? 5 years ago, you had to be good at writing. Now you need to be good at drawing. And are you good at drawing? So you could use, do you know tools like BioRender? Do you have BioRender or tools like that? Or you are good yourself with PowerPoint but try to, and this is again quite complicated, try to capture, integrate the content of your paper on a single picture. This is really nice. If it's a nice one, it will receive a lot of echo. And this is what we try to do for this meeting, which each state-of-the-art paper, manuscript, there should be an accompanying visual abstract. And video abstract, this is also quite nice if the author or the publisher can produce a short summary, 2-3 minutes, like a podcast about your paper, increasingly important. Very nice. And maybe, I don't know if you have seen that paper. If you are not an expert in gene therapy, I would invite you to go back to this issue of that was published in November 2023 in Hemophilia. It's freely accessible. This is an illustrated review about gene therapy of hemophilia. So it's like a cartoon. So what I did in my hospital 2 weeks ago, I took that paper and, you know, we have a sort of forum with all the doctors of all the hospital. And I sent them that paper. And I told them, well, look, you know, this is how we should be able to communicate in the future. This is a nice example. And if you see that paper, you will learn about, well, you will realize how communications can be better in 2024. And if you go through it, okay, well, you will learn about gene therapy. And one of my friends, a cardiologist, told me, Cedric, great, I understood gene therapy of cardiology. I love cartoons. You know, in Belgium, we have Tintin, in Belgium, we love cartoons. And that guy, this cardiologist told me, I understood the complexity of gene therapy of hemophilia. This is fascinating. You know, I will start doing this. So let's work on this. But again, it's quite demanding. It's really, really demanding. But I think this is the future. I'm not saying this is replacing, you know, the classical paper with a lot of details that we need. But when we reach a specific state of knowledge, when we need to share this, and I think gene therapy is an example. And this morning, we had discussion about guidelines. I think the next step, Glenn, would be to translate the guidelines in some sort of visual reviews. Okay, I think we just need 13 pages to summarize this. I think that would be great for the community. And I think that was my last slide. Thank you for your attention, and I hope this was useful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.